All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Well, first off, I just wanted to say hello to everyone and thanks so much for taking the time to join us during the holiday season. I'm sure you all are extremely busy, but I truly think that bringing American lamb into your holiday parties can make things interesting and bring things to the next level. Just some general housekeeping points to start off. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, you can feel free to type them in the chat and we can get to them at the end, or we are going to have a Q&A at the end where if you'd like to verbally ask your question, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. And then just so you guys are aware, we are recording this. So if you feel uncomfortable with having your camera on or just don't want to have your camera on, that's totally fine. Today, we're honored to hear from Austin, Texas sommelier and journalist Jessica Dupuy. Jessica has experience in both the food and the beverage realms, which allows her to bring a unique perspective when pairing the two. And Jessica is going to walk us through her pairing process for a few holiday lamb dishes that we've already selected, and then go into a couple wine entertaining tips. Typically, lamb is associated with rack, but we've been sure to include recipes that include a variety of different cuts, including several value cuts. We've got everything from ground and then, of course, to the glorious rack. And before I hand it over to Jessica to get to the fun stuff, I just wanted to mention the importance of choosing American lamb. Today, over 50% of the lamb that you find in the stores is either imported from Australia or New Zealand. And luckily, we're all so competitive that all the lamb is clearly labeled where it's coming from, which makes it super easy to make sure you're choosing American. And when you're choosing American, you're directly benefiting over 80,000 farmers and ranchers throughout the US, a large portion of which are small family farms, and you purchasing American means the world to them. And I may be biased, but American may or may not taste better than the rest. And then lately it has been a bit difficult to find American lamb. So if any of you are ever struggling to source lamb, you can go ahead to our website. It's americanlamb.com. And we have a section at the top titled Where to Buy. And excuse me, you just fill out this quick 2-minute survey and we can email you a list of all the places in your area that are selling lamb. And so with that, I'm gonna pass it over to Jessica.
All right, well, Courtney, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's joining us this evening. And for those of you on the West Coast, I guess like late afternoon, thanks for spending a little time with us. And hopefully you'll come away with some good ideas on not only how to pair lamb, but just how to enjoy wines over the holidays in general. I was thrilled when the American Lamb Board contacted me to talk about this because honestly, like, I mean, I know I'm from Texas. I know she mentioned that I'm from Texas. So it would be, you know, one of those things to assume that perhaps beef is the way that we go here, and you wouldn't be wrong. But lamb has a special place in my heart. And I think it's because it has a lot of versatility. There's a little more kind of interesting depth of flavor, particularly when you use different cuts and different preparations for it. And when it comes to wine, it really has kind of this fun blank canvas opportunity that you can pair with. So we're going to get into that, but let me give you a little bit of background on where I came from and why I'm standing here. So as mentioned, I am from Texas, and I actually started out as a food writer first, particularly working with publications like Texas Monthly Magazine, and then also branching out and doing cookbooks. So a number of different chefs I've worked with across the state of Texas, like restaurants such as Uchi, which is a sushi restaurant, barbecue restaurant called the Salt Lick. And then I've also worked with publications such as Southern Living to create regional cookbooks that take a look at the different regions of Texas, as well as the different regions of the South and kind of the historic flavors from those places. But at the same time, I was offered an opportunity over 10 years ago to start covering wine in Texas. And if any of y'all are from Texas, hopefully you know that we do make it. And for those of you that don't, we do make it. The question was, you know, what's going on in that scene? Is it good? Is it worth talking about? And I quickly realized that in order for me to be able to talk about Texas wines with any sort of authority, it would help for me to know deeply more about wines from around the world. And so I sort of started on the process or the journey of getting different wine certifications. So I am a certified sommelier, and through the Wine and Spirits Educational Trust, I am working on my diploma, which is a 2-year educational program where they test you on not only your knowledge of wine, but your ability to taste wines blind and understand where they came from, et cetera. So it's been kind of a fun journey because I had the food already, and then bringing in the wine, it's perhaps one of the best jobs I could have ever created for myself. And in doing so, I've had the opportunity not only to write for Texas publications, but for a number of publications across the country, such as Wine Enthusiast, Food and Wine Magazine, Decanter, which is based in the UK, and then a number of other trade publications. And it's allowed me to also travel all over the world to experience wines in some of the iconic regions from which they come. So hopefully that gives me enough credibility to be able to talk to you about these pairings tonight and some of my favorite wine selections, particularly when it comes to lamb. I don't know, again, depending on where you are in the country, but it's 6 o'clock here in Texas. So I do have a glass of wine with me, and I hope that you do as well. If not, feel free to just run to the kitchen real quick and grab one. But if you're wondering what is in my glass, this is actually a beautiful Syrah from Washington State. And Syrah is actually the grape that we're going to start with tonight, or this afternoon, sorry. And it's possibly one of the most classic pairings that you can have with lamb. So Syrah, you know, is originally kind of associated with southern France and the Rhone Valley. And if you know about the foods from there, they're really, you know, lamb is very popular, and the foods and the preparations that they have there, they have a lot of beautiful herbaceous character. So if you've heard of like herbs de Provence, you know, that's commonly used. It's a mixture of things like lavender and rosemary and aniseed sometimes, depending on where you are. And when it comes to the foods there, the wines oftentimes go really well with what they're making. And so there's this saying in the wine world that, you know, whatever grows together goes together. So Syrah, being from the Rhone Valley, it just is this beautiful accompaniment to a lot of their dishes, and lamb being, I think, among the chief ones. So Syrah doesn't tend to be big in terms of tannin structure. So it's not going to be super grippy and rip your palate or anything like that, but it has really great concentration of flavor. And the fruit characteristics, when you're smelling it and tasting it, it kind of brings in notes of, you know, blueberries and raspberries and even blackberries. So kind of a range of red and black and blue fruits. But also, usually it's known for having this kind of vervy, energetic palate that's got these dry herb characters on it. So it almost tastes like you've been, you know, dropping a little bit of dried herbs de Provence in the bottle. That's not what's happening, of course, but it is definitely kind of something that is on the palate, as well as black pepper. So when it comes to a wine like this, and of course they do, you know, they do vary depending on where you are, whether you're in Washington or the Rhone. But in general, this is kind of the characteristic that you're going to get with Syrah. And so when it came to pairing Syrah with a lamb dish, I think one of the things to look at is not just the meat itself, but also the preparation. So we've paired it with the sheet pan lamb dinner. There we go. And this does a couple of things. One, it's basically roasted. And so it gets nice and kind of crackly on the outside, not crackly, it's not the right word, but it's nice and has this kind of herb crust to it, if you will. And it has rosemary and obviously cracked black pepper. And so with that, you get these flavors that are already kind of what you're experiencing when you taste Syrah. Because it's prepared this way, Syrah, because it's not too tannic, has a nice interplay on the palate. So the lamb is going to be juicy and fresh, and then depending on which Syrah you're drinking, it's just going to help lift everything that you're experiencing on the palate with the lamb right off of the palate, and make you want to take another bite. So Syrah is, like I said, it is one of it's an easy go-to pairing. When you get into some of the other grapes, even that we're going to be talking about tonight, you want to make sure that you're taking some other things into consideration in terms of age and how developed the wine is. But when it comes to Syrah, these are wines that typically can age for quite a bit of time, but they're wonderful to drink upon release. So you don't have to worry too much about, is this the right vintage to be pouring or anything like that. They're usually pretty, what you see is what you get. And then yes, they'll develop in the bottle over time. So let's move on to one that actually has a little more oomph. And this is a grape that is very common in Bordeaux. It's Cabernet Franc. And the Cabernet Franc is, when you look at Bordeaux, there's basically 5 main grapes that are used in Bordeaux to make blends. And just to be clear, Bordeaux, depending if you're on the left bank of the region, the left side of the region, you might have more Cabernet Sauvignon heavy wines, whereas on the right side, you're going to have more Merlot heavy wines. But all of them will likely have one or definitely more of the 5 grapes. So Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, which we're going to be talking about, Malbec, and Petite Verdot, which we'll also actually be talking about in just a couple minutes. Cabernet Franc is a really, really great grape on its own. So it makes for a great blending grape in Bordeaux wines, but it's also grown in the Loire Valley and made into a wine as a single variety, just Cabernet Franc. And I love it because it has these great, wonderful, and powerful kind of rich dark fruit characters, everything from cassis and violet. Sorry, that's not a fruit, a flower. I would say probably like dark fruit, maybe blackberry, depending on how it's grown and how it's treated, but you're definitely getting a good dark concentration of fruit. But in addition to that, Cabernet Franc has these beautiful green notes to it, if the grapes are handled correctly for the winemaking. And so in particular, this pairing that we chose for this is braised pomegranate lamb shanks with fennel. And lamb shanks, if you're a cook and love to do braising, what's great about it is it's the meat itself is cooking in its own juices, and it's spending a low and slow amount of time just developing all of the flavors. This is the kind of meal that obviously, like if you're doing a big holiday, whether it's Christmas or whatever special meal, this is the thing that makes the house just smell amazing, and it makes you want to sit down and feast. So Cabernet Franc is a great pair for this because it has a little bit more structure and a little bit more oomph than, for instance, the Syrah that we were talking about a second ago. And for the preparation of braising, that really breaks down the meat, and that really kind of adds this amazing complexity of flavor in the juices once it's served together. So Cabernet Franc can stand up to that and can help break it down. And because it has a really decent amount of tannin, it works really well with the fattiness of the meat that's been cooking for so long. I also like this particular recipe that we've included here because of the inclusion of rosemary. And so those herb and fennel as well. The herbs really do bring out kind of these beautiful green velvety qualities of Cabernet Franc. And interestingly, one of the things that is used in this recipe to braise it is a ruby port. So definitely emphasizing like those kind of like rich red fruit characters, and letting the juices just kind of develop in port. So to me, Cabernet Franc, because it has great structure and good tannin, it really plays nicely with kind of the smooth, sweet character of the juices from a braised lamb shank, and kind of just gives more lift as well when you're enjoying it together. So I hope you have a chance to make this, because it was one of my favorite things to put together in this project in terms of the right flavors coming together. So the next grape is something that a lot of us are familiar with in America, and that is Zinfandel. So Zinfandel, they actually believe that kind of the original grape for Zinfandel originated in Croatia with a completely different name, but America has kind of claimed it as its own. It is prized in California, and it is known for its like rich, jammy character. Deep red fruits, certainly, you know, kind of this, I hate to say jammy and like, you know, you're not getting strawberry jam or something like that, but it has a lot of kind of unctuous character on the palate. It's just nice and heavy and rolls around in kind of a generous way. So with Zinfandel, I would say a lot of different sommeliers that I talk to, lamb kind of, it tends to be another go-to selection for them, because lamb preparations a lot of times are with different fruits and things like that. So in the case here, we've got an American lamb sirloin crostini, and with that is this delicious orange cranberry sauce. So, you know, you could prepare this dish as a full entree if you want and have a couple crostini on the side, but this is actually a really great kind of appetizer to be serving around the holiday table. But the Zinfandel, what's great about it, as opposed to sitting down with like the Cabernet Franc that's going to have the big structure and more tannin that goes well with that kind of long, slow cooked lamb shank, this has a little more buoyancy. It's going to have a little more vibrancy. And so it's a little less serious in general, and yet at the same time has really nice complexity and deep flavor. So I love it for lamb preparations that particularly do have some sort of fruit component with it. You'll definitely, when you taste Zinfandel, the red fruits kind of abound in terms of what you're sensing. And so it could be cranberry, certainly pomegranate is something that's commonly called out, raspberry, even deep strawberry kind of fruits. But then on the back palate, there's this nice like cinnamon, kind of baking spice component to it that goes really well, in particular with the orange cranberry sauce that's in this recipe. So Zinfandel is a go-to, and honestly, you can find Zinfandel on its own at a great price. It's a fantastic value wine. So don't discount it if you happen to see one and want to grab it when you're cooking some lamb. It's a definite great selection. So we're actually going to move to a different style of wine rather than a grape. We are, you know, we've talked a little bit about, we're kind of gone to different places in terms of an average meal, like whether it's the entree itself or some appetizers. And I know we're kind of red heavy in terms of wine selections, but I think it's really good if you consider serving rosé with lamb. So rosé is kind of like the friend to all wine connoisseurs. So those that love white wine, those that love red wine, it kind of bridges everything and brings people together, depending on the different style of rosé that you're serving. But because it's made in a similar fashion to white wine, using red grapes that then kind of have exposure to the red grape skins, it takes on this blush color. not to be confused with like white Zinfandel or blush wine. We're talking classic Provence style rosés that have had some interaction with the skins of the red grapes to be able to pull on some color. What happens when that interaction of skin takes place is you also bring in a little bit, just a little bit of tannic structure and texture to the wine. So while it can be served chilled and should be served chilled, it also and adds this kind of crisp, light, easy component to the palate and goes really well with all sorts of dishes because it has a little bit more oomph, a little bit more structure and texture from the grape skin exposure. It does really well with certain red meats, particularly lamb. And so with this recipe, what worked well, similar to the Zinfandel, is having a little bit of a fruit component included in the recipe. So this is Moroccan American lamb meatballs with pomegranate glaze. And two things are really great with rosé about this dish. The first is that fruit component, like I told you. So the fruitiness of the rosé is going to be beautiful with the fruitiness of this pomegranate glaze that you include with the meatballs. But also, because it's got these beautiful Moroccan spices into the meatballs, cooked into the meatballs, rosé is a great component for anything that has a little bit of extra spice. It kind of helps tame it at the same time, accentuating the beauty of that spice. But it's a great wine to kind of bring it all together and make it this beautiful melange in the palate. So I love rosé, and I honestly, based on the different recipes that we've talked about here, I would definitely serve it with the other, with the roasted lamb, as well as the crostini that we talked about. Probably not with the lamb shank. I think that's going to be too much concentration of flavor from that slow cooking, but rosé would do well with a lot of these dishes. So don't be afraid to serve that, especially if you have people at the table that really prefer white wine. Give them this option, and I don't think you can go wrong. And so finally, we're going to move on to the last grape, which is Petite Verdot. And as I mentioned, Petite Verdot is one of the 5 Bordeaux grapes. It's similar to Cabernet Franc in that it is dark and deep. And oftentimes Petite Verdot isn't even used in high quantities in a Bordeaux blend because it's known for bringing such rich, dark color to the wine. In fact, that's usually why it's used to help, prop up a little more depth to a Bordeaux blend. But on its own, it actually does really well. And so you won't find it in Bordeaux as a single variety, but you are seeing a lot of producers in California, Washington, even Texas, that are using, and Virginia. I'm trying to think, there are a couple of the places that are popping out to me right now that do really well with Petite Verdot and kind of rely on that darker color that it tends to bring to the glass. It does have some good tannic structure. In fact, it can have kind of like components of like leather and tobacco with it. And so that's a lot of the reason why it's blended with other grapes to kind of help calm it down. But honestly, if done right, and if kind of not done too heavy-handedly in the winery, it's a beautiful wine on its own. So I love it with, we've got another roasted kind of preparation for the pairing that we have here, which is a roasted rack of American lamb that has this walnut and parsley pesto. So similar to the Cabernet Franc, Petite Verdot does have some nice herbaceous quality to it in the wine. And because of its bigness, I think it goes really well with kind of a roasted rack, right? Where again, we've got some juices kind of coming together. It's just, it's all, it's taking its time to, again, slowly cook in the oven, not the same as braising, but definitely kind of bringing all these wonderful flavors together. In this case, this rack is kind of dusted with rosemary and Dijon mustard. And so you've got these beautiful flavors coming together. But in addition, we've got a walnut and parsley pesto. And what's great about that is that that kind of parsley aspect to it, there's Parmesan cheese in it. That's all going to really kind of make the Petite Verdot just punch a little bit and have a little bit of pop to it. So I would encourage you, if you want to have a little bit of fun, to actually look for maybe a Petite Verdot on its own, and then maybe a Cabernet Franc and even a Cab Sauv. Maybe, you know, a couple of these different varieties we've talked about tonight, and taste them with different preparations of lamb. To me, that's the most fun, because everyone's going to get, you know, everyone's going to think something a little bit different and have a different preference. And I think that's probably my number one tip when it comes to trying to pair. I think it definitely matters a lot to think about what exactly, you know, what's the meat, what's the vegetable, what herbs are involved here. It matters to think about the preparation. So like we've talked about roasting or braising. Of course, we haven't talked about grilling, but there's that component that brings smokiness to the meat that you're using. And while all of those things are really important, especially if you're entertaining, to me, the most fun is to give people a couple of different options and a couple of different ways to experience the preparation that you've made on the table. So if you want to have a little bit of fun, grab a couple of different wines made with different grapes to kind of make that, you know, more of a conversation starter when you're at the table. So I hope that those grape varieties are kind of on par with what you are looking for when it comes to pairing. They're definite, in my opinion, you will hit a home run with any of them when it comes to lamb. And if it's okay, I'm actually going to go through and give you guys a couple of tips that we were kind of thinking about. You know, I get asked these questions all the time in terms of how to serve and different wines and things like that. So the first thing that I get a lot of times is how to properly chill and store wine. So when it comes to red and white wines in general, a lot of people say, oh, you know, you can keep them at room temperature and it should be fine in terms of storage and in terms of storing or in terms of serving. And I think in general, that might be okay if you live in a cooler climate, like, you know, in Bordeaux or in Burgundy or something like that. But if you live in Texas, room temperature is a lot warmer than you should be serving any wine. So in general, I keep wines for storage at about 56 to 60 degrees. And I do always store them. Let's see. I don't have a bottle with me, but sorry, I just brought a glass. But I usually store them laying down. And this is especially important with wines that have a cork in them rather than a screw cap. The cork needs to be touching the liquid so that even though there's not a lot happening, oxygen interaction is not really going to take place. And if the cork dries out without that contact to the wine itself on the inside of the bottle, then more oxygen is going to get into the wine. And that's problematic if you're trying to hold on to your wines and age them for a little while. If those corks dry out, you're going to get some oxidation into the wines, and it's not going to be the best way that you could enjoy that wine. So I'll just put it that way. In terms of serving wine, I have a general tip, and that is we tend to serve our white wines a little too cold, and we tend to serve our red wines a little too warm. So what I usually encourage people to do is, if you're going to serve some white wines at a dinner, chill them for a couple of hours in the refrigerator, just fine. And then about 20 minutes before you want to serve dinner and you're going to sit down, I would encourage you to take that wine out, go ahead and open it and just let it sit on the table. And that is going to bring the temperature up a little bit, not too much. It's still going to be nice and crisp and refreshing, but the flavors that are basically asleep when they are super cold start to wake up a little bit in white wines. And so you'll get a little bit more interplay of flavors from the wine, particularly when you're enjoying it with food. So always keep it very chilled, but pull it out 20 minutes before you want to start enjoying it. And then it's the reverse actually with red wines. So obviously I do like to keep all of my red wines kind of at like a 56 degree, like I said, in my cellar. But if you don't have a cellar, this is okay. Don't worry about it. What I would suggest you do is put it in the refrigerator. Yes, the refrigerator, don't be afraid. About 20 to 30 minutes before you're gonna serve. So keep it out at room temperature, but while you're preparing your meal, while you're grilling, whatever it is you're doing, watch that time frame and go ahead and pop it in the refrigerator. And that's going to bring the temperature down. Not so much that it masks any flavors that are happening in the wine, but just enough to get it to the point where it's not going to be leaping out of the glass when you first start to enjoy it. We need to remember that red wines do tend to have a little bit of higher alcohol. And so when you drink them at room temperature, they tend to just scream at you if they're warm. But if they're cool, that all goes away. And so your experience with that wine is going to be much more enjoyable if you have it just a little bit chilled. Not a lot, just a little bit. So those are things I love to make sure people are comfortable with when they are serving and particularly entertaining. A couple other questions I tend to get are, does the glass make a difference? There are so many manufacturers that are making glasses for every specific grape, right? Like there's a Bordeaux glass, there's a Pinot Noir glass, there is, a Chardonnay glass. I think this is very fun. And I think that there are definitely nuances that you can experience from these wines when they are in these specific glasses. I don't know about you, but I have zero space to be able to get a set of glasses for every grape in the world. I also don't have that kind of budget. So I tend to, I'm going to show you what I have. You don't have to go out and buy these, but this is just a classic Schott Spiesel. It's an Austrian company, and they make a nice single stem glass, and this is their red wine glass. I use this for red and white wines, partly because I think that white wines deserve just as much opportunity to get to show off in a glass as a red wine. And you'd be surprised at how much some white wines have to share with you in terms of personality. So I think it makes things easier by sticking with one glass. I do like a little bit of a bigger glass. And so that's why I choose the red wine glass. So if you're looking for something like that, don't feel like you have to jump in and get specific about grapes. If you want to, it's great. And I do think you'll find some fun things. The one thing that I am a stickler on, and we didn't talk about sparkling wine tonight, but if you want to serve sparkling wine and you want to get the best possible experience with that wine, whether it's champagne or Prosecco or Cava from Spain, I would suggest serving it in a wine glass. So actually, in my case, it would be this one. I would open up a bottle of champagne and I would pour a little bit, into this glass, and that's how I would enjoy it. I do not like to use flutes. So much so that if I'm at a restaurant and I order a glass of champagne, I'll say, please, could I just have it in a wine glass? And I don't mean to be snobby with that at all, but once you start drinking it that way, it's really hard to go back. And just think about it, right? Like wine has so many floral and fruit and all sorts of components on it, just as we've been talking about tonight. And it's great to be able to experience those. And those little thin flutes make it really hard to get your nose in there. So if you can swirl, imagine this is a champagne, give it a little swirl and smell it. It's a much different experience. And also those bubbles kind of open up and do, give a little bit of a different texture when it's got a broader glass. So that's one of my, if you go out and start asking for for wine glasses when you enjoy your champagne, I hope nobody gives you a hard time, but certainly at home, give it a try and see what you think. It's my preference, but I love to share that tip with people. So, we're at it. I just want to be mindful of everybody's time. If anyone has any questions, I would love to help you out with those, but or I could just give more tips, whatever you would like to do. But I don't know if we do have questions or not. Let's see.
Someone asked if you have any tips for storing leftover wine.
Oh, that's a good question. So, yeah, there are a couple of fun things here. So, first of all, you can have all sorts of devices, right? You've probably seen like the little rubber stopper that you can get that has the little pump thing that sucks the oxygen out. Those are pretty good. And if you're trying to hold on to that wine for a day or two, then those are going to work well. Honestly, the cork is just fine if you're going to hold the wine for a day or two. And when we're talking about having opened a bottle of red wine or a bottle of white wine, the time is ticking at that point. You really aren't going to have more than a couple of days anyway. So don't sweat it if you don't have special devices and you just have the cork. Stick that cork back in there, hit it a couple of times. And the thing to do without fail is to put it in the refrigerator. And that's whether it's a red wine or a white wine. And the reason for that is in the refrigerator, there is less oxygen moving around and less oxygen that can interplay with the wine, even if it's got a cork in it or a rubber stopper. So putting it in the refrigerator helps buy you more time. And it also, and I've mentioned oxygen. The reason you don't want oxygen really interplaying with the wine is it does significantly change the flavor of the wine. The acidity and structure of the wine starts to feel flabby and boring and drab. And also oxygen itself changes the phenolic components to where it doesn't taste as good. So it's really about keeping as much oxygen away from it as possible. There are a couple of other things that people use. Like you can buy this thing called oh my gosh, I'm forgetting it. It's a spray can of argon spray, and you can spray a little bit of it into the bottle before you put the cork right on it or the stopper right on it. That helps displace even more oxygen and then seal it so that if you want to hold on to it, you can do that. You can get that at lots of specialty wine stores and liquor stores. It's called, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, but ask for the spray can of argon gas, and someone will bring you right to it. And then finally, this is a little more expensive, but my favorite device is called a Coravan. And particularly, I'm married, I have a husband, he and I have different preferences when it comes to wine. So I may not want to open a bottle and drink just a glass if he's not going to share it with me. And he kind of feels the same way. He's like, well, I'd rather have this. And so the Coravan actually lets you leave the cork in the bottle, and it has a tiny needle that goes in, and it lets you displace the wine into a glass. And as the wine is coming out, it has this little argon gas chamber that's putting that into the wine. So you get no oxygen, and that wine can be accessed. Like you can do that multiple times for months. So I've tasted a wine and come back to it 6 months later, and it's just like it was when I first, tasted it. Those things can be about $200, if not more, depending on which version you get of that. So it's definitely for the person that wants to spend a little more time on their wine. So being a sommelier, it was a no-brainer for me to buy that. But as I said, you are just fine for a couple of days. If you want to use a cork, just make sure you put it in that refrigerator. I hope that helps.
That's wild. I had no idea that was a thing.
Yeah.
I guess I'll ask a personal question. Is decanting necessary?
Oh, that's a good question. So, so back to the issue of oxygen, right? So for decanting, yes, decanting is really great for wines made with grapes that are very big in structure and very big in tannin. So, for instance, like some of the ones we talked about tonight, Cabernet, we didn't talk about Cabernet Sauvignon, but that's definitely one you could decant. Cabernet Franc could be a good one. And then some wines from like Italy, like Barolos, certain, Chiantis could be. A lot of times the reason you want to decant is not only if the structure of the wine is really big, but if the age of the wine is fairly significant. So big structure, when you pour it into a big decanter, the wine starts to interact with oxygen. And if you let it sit for a little while, that structure, not just tannin really, that's not going to go away, but the kind of the energy of that wine has been cooped up in a bottle for a long time. So if you think about like Genie in a bottle, right? And when Genie, you rub the rub the bottle and Genie comes out and he stretches and he's like, oh my gosh, it's been so tight, cooped up in that little bottle. That's how the wine feels, the bigger the wine is. And so when you put it into a decanter, it just has some space to move around and kind of chill out for a second, and interplay with that oxygen. And so that's great for big young wines. And it's also great for wines that have some age for the same reason. The longer you've slept, the more tight and tight is the best word, like tense you get. So putting it into a decanter and letting it have some space to breathe is going to help just let it stretch out. That's the best example I can think of to give you. The flavors are going to develop the more it's interacted with oxygen in that decanter. If you don't have a decanter, two suggestions. One, you can just open the bottle and let it breathe on its own, just have the cork out of it. But if it's a big wine, I would do that a good hour before you want to serve it and just give it some time. You could even pour a little bit of a glass, a little bit of wine into the glass to even add some more oxygen into that bottle. The other thing you could do, and there's no judgment here, is if you have an old school coffee decanter, right? Like where you're making a pot of coffee, make sure it's very clean and doesn't taste like coffee. But you could pour the wine into that. You could even pour it into a flower base. I know this sounds crazy, but you can do this. And if you've got a funnel, so let it do that, let it decant for 20 to 30 minutes before you want to serve it. And then you could funnel it back into the bottle. And so it's had its exposure to the oxygen. No one has to see that you put it in a coffee maker or a coffee decanter, coffee pot. But it accomplishes what you're trying to accomplish. So that's totally fine. And then just serve the bottle and nobody has to know where it's been before that. So that's a suggestion too.
Awesome. And then someone asked another question. They said that they generally pair their spicier foods with like a fruitier rosé or Riesling, but do you have any red recommendations for spicy food?
Yes, I love this question. Yay. Okay, so yes, you can go with some lighter Pinot Noirs, but it's hard to know unless you're really familiar with different regions around the world, which Pinot Noirs that would be, right? So like ones from California tend to be a little bit heavier and more concentrated. So that's not one I would do. However, look for places that are cooler in climate. And so honestly, one of my favorite things to do is get wines from Austria. And since you like Riesling, Pinot Noir from Germany is a great option. And then there's a little region in Italy, right on the border of Austria, called Alto Adige. So I'm going to drop some grape names that are little, so Pinot Noir being one of them. There's also, it's a grape called, hold on, I want to make sure I say it right. So Saint Laurent, and it's very similar to Pinot Noir, and it's light and kind of very, very centric. And it is wonderful with, as kind of like a great red pairing with spice, with spicier foods. What you're looking for is definitely like a lighter red berry kind of wine. Another great option is Beaujolais. Some of the lighter Beaujolais. So not Beaujolais Nouveau, not the thing that we are in America are kind of typically used to seeing around Thanksgiving time, but actually Cru Beaujolais. It's made with a grape called Gamay, and it tends to be a lot lighter in style. Not a lot of tannin, not a lot of big structure, but it delivers on big flavor. So I would definitely suggest looking to red wines in Austria, red wines in Germany, which are mainly going to be Pinot Noir, but they're going to be a lighter, earthier style of Pinot Noir. And both of those countries, they are great values. So you're going to also not spend too much money on them. And then also Beaujolais. So you might ask a sommelier or just a retailer, you know, hey, I want to get a Beaujolais that's nice on the lighter side, because depending on where it's grown in the Beaujolais region of France, like Morgon, and I would say probably Moulin Avant, those are going to be bigger Beaujolais. Whereas if you go to the sub-region called Fleury, you do not have to remember any of this. Those Beaujolais are going to be right up your alley. The trick will be making sure you chill it, I would say 30 minutes before you serve it. But man, I would totally drink those with Thai food, all sorts of spicy foods all day long. Yes.
Someone just said that they love their lamb souvlaki. I think that's how you say that. Can you suggest a good wine for that?
Yeah, well, you got to go to Greece for that, I think, for sure. And man, oh gosh, if we could do a whole series on Greek wines, because they're so fun. But you know, Zino Mavro, I mean, that's the first thing. I know that I'm not going to try to spell it. I'm so sorry. But there are some really great Greek wines. And I think more and more they're starting to get onto the scene here. So if you've got a favorite wine retailer that does a good job at kind of bringing in wines from around the world, I would certainly say I want to start exploring Greek wines, and red and white, because the whites are just super powerful with energy and vibrancy. They've got a lot of acidity in them and minerality, whereas the reds, kind of similar. They have just so much character to them, and they are great with that dish for sure. The red ones especially. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, does anyone else have any other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing anything or hearing anything. So thank you, Jessica. That was so amazing.
Yay.
Great.
It's super fun. I love getting to share all the little tips. If I can help anybody, that's what I love to do.
I definitely learned a lot myself.
Good.
And thank you guys all for joining us tonight. I hope you had a great night. Oh, maybe we have a question. Oh no, just a thank you.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
During your talk, you mentioned about refrigerating wines.
Yes.
And you said the wine was 20 minutes before you drink it. And you also mentioned about refrigerating a red wine.
Mm-hmm.
Do you let the red wine breathe before you refrigerate it, or do you refrigerate it and then let the red wine breathe?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, I would let it breathe before, if it's a bigger wine, right? I would let it breathe, 30 minutes to an hour, depending on what kind of wine it is. And then pop that cork just gently into it, just so nothing gets knocked over and a mess doesn't happen in your refrigerator. And then then I would stand it up in the fridge for about 20 minutes. And so then it's had its interaction with oxygen and has had time to kind of stretch a little bit. But then, yeah, you'll be serving it at a really good temperature to enjoy with food. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining us, and I hope you all have smooth holidays and a great night.
Thanks to all of you, and I hope you guys enjoy some good wine and hopefully some lamb too.
Thank you.